righty, we're in draft week, baby. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of nervous, man. This is exciting. This is fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we've made a lot of statements and predictions over the last 2-3 months. So it'll be interesting to see if any of those come true or are anywhere close, right? I'm a GM probably trying to blow people off the scent a little bit, but said, we're wronger than we've ever been. So I'd be interested to see what that looks like.
Yeah, does that mean they are actually righter than they've ever been? I was trying to think about what I expect. Like, do I expect more Cleveland Farrells in this draft? Do I expect
Which I mean, look, they showed us in that one.
Right. Anyways, we're going to talk to Peter King, who is probably the best person to ask about this stuff. He wrote a fantastic article as usual yesterday. His mock draft is in there. He's got Tua going to the Patriots. We're going to talk about that. He's got a lot of cool stuff in there. As of right now, you're I'm reading through all the different things that are coming out from each team. Which one do you think is the biggest pile of baloney at this point?
Well, this isn't a team specific one, but I'm still firmly in the camp that Tua will be taken high.
Yeah.
And I think that I could be wrong. We were wrong about the Giants 2 years ago, but I think that the probability that the Washington Redskins take Chase Young with the second pick is lower than people think.
You think so?
Mm-hmm. And the betting markets somewhat support that. I mean, Young to Washington specifically is -800, whereas Young, under 2.5 and all that kind of stuff is in the -2,000 sort of range. So I do think that there is some support for the idea that Washington is not a complete lock to stay at 2 and take Chase Young. So that, and this could be just wishful thinking because we all want Tua to go second because that I think would make the most sense to us. But I think the probability is higher than people are handicapping it at now.
So one of the ones that I think is really interesting is the Giants saying that they've been doing all this Justin Herbert scouting because it's such a clear please trade up with us, sort of situation. But that kind of makes me think, okay, maybe they're not super sold on anyone at 4. And 4 could be, again, as it was last year, a totally random, guy. Could it be someone that we're just not expecting? If Detroit takes Okudah, could it be, is Derek Brown going at 4? And I was thinking through the top 10, and I was like, I wonder if there's one guy that slips that maybe we haven't talked about yet because we're all talking about Tua slipping. And one that came to mind was Isaiah Simmons. And I actually got a lot of flack for this, but I could see a la Derwin James, interestingly, him really starting to slide, which would make no sense. I would take him high, but something like that's going to happen. You just know it's going to.
I mean, Simmons under 6.5 prop was -200 just a couple weeks ago when I wrote about it. And I think now he's probably more of a favorite to go at over 6.5 than anything. And I think it's because the Giants were very much the team on Simmons early. It made a lot of sense. Their defense struggled, covering over the middle of the field. But teams now really like certainty, right? And when a player is of the Derwin James ilk or of the Isaiah Simmons ilk, there is less certainty. And when a player is like Derek Brown, the teams gravitate towards that player. Or Jedrick Wills, who I think is probably the favorite to go to the Giants at 4. Mm-hmm. When you sort of know exactly what a player is and isn't, the teams place a premium on that, which is interesting.
What's interesting about Wills is we talked to Mike a little bit about this. He looks the part, but for some reason the grade doesn't match. And I'm always concerned about the guys who it looks good, but the result, if you look good doing something and you've got all the tools and you're playing in Alabama, why aren't you dominating? That's kind of my question with him. And that's why our projections are so much lower on him because his pass blocking grade just was not nearly as solid as some of the other guys in the class.
Yeah. And that's But that was the same thing with Saquon Barkley. At least Saquon Barkley was good at doing what he looked good doing, but it didn't add a lot of value, and the Giants gravitated that way. Daniel Jones is the same, right? Daniel Jones looked the part 100%. He's big, strong. He's got the quarterback appearance.
Oh, yeah.
But he's not like actually, proficient at it. So
we've got looks like Peter is entering the chat. There he is.
Hello.
Peter King, what's going on, man? Can you hear me? Uh-oh. So this is the trial that the NFL draft is going to go through, right? We're trying to figure out
taking a bullet for the NFL here.
How Zoom is going to work out. Can you hear us yet?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Good.
Awesome. We can hear you.
How are you guys?
We're doing well. No technical difficulties on our Zoom call. So like the NFL clearly should come take a page out of our book so that they can get it right. Oh, man.
By the way, it's a total absolute pile of crap, and I can't wait to talk about that.
Let's jump into it right now. Because I had a feeling that was the case. You knew people were going to throw out that there were technical difficulties. So tell us more.
There are multiple redundancies, as they are called, for the NFL's draft this weekend. And the thing that really bothers me about this impression that Armageddon is going to happen and Dave Gettleman is going to go into a fetal position in the corner, and when the fourth pick, they're not going to be able to find him. And I mean, let me explain to you how NFL teams will be able to draft. Okay. Number one, there's this channel on Microsoft Teams, which is probably a better encrypted Zoom. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there's this channel on there that's going to be open only to NFL people with the right codes. And basically, in encryption, Dave Gettleman will be able to type in Tristan Wirfs, tackle Iowa, send it to Draft Central, and there it is. That's their pick. Okay, let's say he doesn't want to do that. There's going to be a live, open conference call that will be muted for every team in the league, but 3 dedicated people per team, 3, are going to have access to that conference call line. And if for some reason they either don't want to use Microsoft Teams or something happens, they can pick up that phone line, unmute the line, and say, hey, New York, this is Dave Gettleman with the Giants. We're taking Tristan Wirfs, tackle Iowa. And now let's say, that there's something happens there. Dave Gettleman has a phone number of a guy named Ken Fiore, who every year runs the NFL draft in the NFL office. And he has a number for Ken Fiore. He can pick up the phone and call Ken Fiore and say, hey, Ken, we're drafting Tristan Wirfs, tackle Iowa. Okay, Dave, thanks a lot. Good luck. So if you were in kindergarten, maybe you'd screw this up. But I don't even think if you're in kindergarten, you could screw this up.
Well, we talked about this earlier, in the whole process. And I think you wrote about this really well in your piece. And I think Scott Pioli did for CBS as well. I think a lot of it is just trying to use this as an excuse to be more, put it out a month and be more prepared. Right. I mean, that's kind of, one of the, and it really is sort of like a little bit tone deaf on their part, given, sort of all the difficulties that people are dealing with right now in our country, that they, can't seemingly do what a lot of people have been doing in a pinch for the last 2 months.
Yeah, look, and I, honestly, over the weekend, I talked to a total of 13 team people, okay, because I was mostly doing my mock draft, okay? And I asked everyone about this thing, and a few of them said, well, you know what? It's something like, well, undrafted free agency might be a little bit different. It might be tough. And I wrote 500 words in my column that basically explained how one team, the Los Angeles Rams, are going to be doing undrafted free agency. It's totally fascinating. They usually with the Rams, guys would be in the same room, and it would be almost like a Wall Street boiler room where people would be saying, yeah, I got this, I got that, I just made this sale, I did this. And usually teams are in one facility, and maybe they'll be in an office down the hall or whatever, but they can basically say, hey, we just got John Doe of San Jose State, or we just got this guy. But in this particular case, what is so interesting about this year is that, let's say the Rams, the way the Rams do this is they do one of their regional scouts and one assistant coach will basically have one position group. So in other words, what you're going to have with the Rams, and this is the guy I wrote about, they have a Southeastern scout in Daphne, Alabama, who will be, on a video conference with the running backs coach, Thomas Brown of the Rams. So Michael Pierce is the name of the scout. Thomas Brown is the name of the running backs coach. They will be together, and they will be making phone calls and reporting to each other. Hey, I just got this guy for $5,000. And then they will report it back to Les Snead, the general manager, and that's how they'll keep track of it. Ridiculously different. A scout in Alabama, a coach at his home somewhere in the Los Angeles area, and then talking to Les Snead, who's also at home in the Los Angeles area. So those are the kind of things that are going to be really weird about this, but I don't think technology is going to be an issue at the end of the draft.
What does seem, and this was one of the most interesting things in your mock, is there does seem to be an increasing narrative about, okay, Tua is falling. Yeah. And I was trying to hypothesize about this because I didn't just want to be like, okay, Peter, like describe your logic here. I'm trying, the whole narrative right now is let's not take risks, right? Let's be smart. Let's make sure, as a nation, as a family, as a person, whoever it is, taking risks is a bad decision right now because, it could end up really badly for you and it could end up really badly for the nation. And it almost seems like that's the way people are rationalizing Herbert over Tua because the numbers are not ambiguous. I mean, Tua is far more accurate and all of the injury stuff, look, the ankles should be stronger because of the surgeries. And the hip displacement, I mean, we've seen like 2 of those. So that's got to be a freak injury. Yeah. What do you think is pushing Tua down, as it seems to be happening?
I mean, I don't think you should minimize the hip injury.
Okay.
I mean, how would you feel about having a major need at quarterback? And maybe the Dolphins will pick him because I truly do not know where Tua is going to go. And I don't know if the Dolphins are taking Herbert. That's what most people believe. And I wish I had a mole inside the building who had a big mouth. I don't, but I just believe right now that if you take Tua, I had a team doctor tell me that I think this is an injury you worry about when Tua is 35, not when he's 25, which I think says it all. In other words, I take the risk on Tua. I'm not the one signing him for $30 million and turning my team over to him in 2021.
Yeah, I mean,
so that's the point.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like you think about that. If he lasts 10 years in the NFL, though, that's a successful pick. I mean, we've been so spoiled with the Bradys and the the Roethlisbergers and the Rivers and all those players that we sort of hold that up as the bar. But in reality, if a guy is drafted first, the first round and starts for you for 10 years, chances are he was pretty good. And so then the question is okay, are we assessing risk properly? Is the risk that Herbert is not good enough to even play for your team higher or lower than the risk that Tua, is not healthy enough to be, to reach his potential? I think is really where it's been mispriced.
Let me ask you this. Do you think teams are saying, hey, next year really matters, maybe more than they should be? In other words, okay,
No, I don't think that's why. Tua's not falling because people don't think he's going to be available in 2020. That's not it. This is a long-term decision. If you pick a quarterback with the 5th pick in the draft, you think he's going to be your quarterback for a long time. And, I don't know what the Dolphins medics are telling him. I just don't know. But I do think, to say that shouldn't be a part of your decision because, ask Dennis Pitta if that should be a part of his decision. Right. This is not a torn ACL. Mm-hmm. This is not even in baseball, Tommy John surgery, because now players are coming back from that all the time. This is a distinctly different and unusual injury that does not happen very often. I wouldn't call it rare, but it doesn't happen very often.
So if
Tua Tagovailoa has shown time and again that he's not going to be a guy who sits in the pocket and just sits there and is going to be like Brees or Brady, even though everybody's comparing him to Drew Brees. And I get that. I don't see that. I mean, I've watched him play football. He's more like Taysom Hill than Drew Brees, isn't he? I mean, you guys watch him a lot more than I have. He's not Drew Brees, is he? He's in size, he is, but that's it.
I think he's drastically lower on the list than Burrow in my opinion. But as far as the other quarterbacks besides Burrow, I think from an accuracy perspective, I do think and Chris talked about this yesterday. Handling pressure has been an issue for him, which I think kind of is how Brees sort of creeps in as a comp, because Brees doesn't handle pressure well. He's learned to avoid it more often later in his career, but. The accuracy is there. And the real question mark for me with Tua is how brilliant his support was. And if you are being drafted into the top 10 in the NFL, your support probably sucks. And so can you overcome that really is the question for me, more than, him fundamentally as a quarterback. It's the injuries and how much did we, go, all crazy about him because he had, 4 NFL wide receivers to throw to on every down.
I mean, that's a huge, huge factor. Somebody said this to me that, when I was talking to him this weekend, and it's the kind of smart ass comment that I toyed with using, but I decided it was the ultimate cheap shot. Maybe not but it was just a cheap shot. And that is, would Devontae Parker be even a top 3 receiver on the 2020 or the 2019 Alabama Crimson Tide? And answer that. I would say yes. Third. He might be third, but he wouldn't be ahead of Judy or Ruggs. Okay. And so you make such a good point. And look, look at the help with a 1st-round running back and a 1st-round wide receiver that Joe Burrow had. And I don't know that the running back is going to go in the 1st round, but he's a definitely 1st-round caliber running back. I think he'd be perfect for Tom Brady. Absolutely perfect. Because Tom Brady wants a guy who can swing out of the backfield and who can play, in the pinch, play in the slot and be a good receiver. But anyway, I guess my point is, a lot of these guys who are going to go to the NFL, I'm not saying they have better skill players in college football, but in a couple of cases, it's pretty damn close.
It's not apples to apples for many situations. I would say the only comeback to Burrow was, I think Burrow clearly elevated the play of those around him. The passing game at LSU has been, the best NFL passer to come out of LSU in the last 30 years is Odell Beckham. Historically, I think he elevated the Justin Jeffersons who are not on our radar. He elevated the Thaddeus Mosses. But to your point,
you're not going to give Joe Brady any credit, huh?
Well, and Joe Brady as well. But that's, of course, that's tricky too. That's something that Tua didn't have, which is like sort of a brilliant offensive mind. So none of these things are very, easy comparisons, just because you have to look at so many confounding variables.
My pushback on the whole, hey, supporting cast was good is that's the case for a lot of these quarterbacks. I mean, Oregon was a good team. You still need a quarterback to make the accurate throw when it's open. And ideally, you have a good offensive coordinator, you have a good scheme, you have a couple receivers that can get open. You don't, that should be something that you're preparing for. So I'd go as far as to say, hey, if you don't want to take Tua, your doctors tell him it's way too risky, that's okay. I would not then replace it with taking Herbert, especially if I'm the Dolphins. I would just say, okay, Tristan Wirfs, we've mentioned him a couple times. I'll take him and then go, take a flyer on a quarterback later on.
Well, people give Cleveland so much flack for trading back for so many years, and I get it. I understand. They passed up on Watson, they passed up on Mahomes, but they ultimately got Baker Mayfield, who I think is still a pretty good quarterback prospect. I agree with you. If Tua doesn't pass your tests, I don't think Herbert's the alternative. I think hanging on to your draft picks and moving back and looking at Justin Fields or Trevor Lawrence the following year is a pretty good alternative, especially given that you're only in year 2 of the Flores regime for Miami, for example.
What I thought was interesting, Peter, was that you have San Francisco and New England trading, and this is unlikely, right? Probably in the grand scheme of things. But New England and San Francisco have traded before. How much does that familiarity make this maybe more likely in a situation where people are probably a little more apprehensive given the things that are going on? Do you think that makes it?
Can I tell you one part of my logic on this? I mean, this is going to sound really, really weird and a little too human for the NFL, but let's be honest. We're sitting at the bar, we're just talking right now. And let's be absolutely, totally honest, okay? Bill Belichick did John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan a solid. When he called them and he said, hey, listen, we don't have much time. You got 2 hours. If you give me your 2 next year, you guys can have Garoppolo. And literally, they called him in less than 2 hours and said, we'll take the deal. Now, you talk about this being out of the absolute clear blue sky, it was. But do you know why Bill Belichick did that? In part, he was pragmatic. He knew that Brady was going to play a few more years, and eventually he'd lose Garoppolo and might get a 3rd or 4th round compensatory. But this was one of the really weird things about this. Somebody inside the Patriots said Bill Belichick liked Garoppolo, as much as he's liked almost any player he's had. He really had respect for him, really liked his family, got to be a little bit buddy-buddy with his dad, and he really liked Garoppolo. What happens if Jimmy Garoppolo goes to free agency? Just theorize. And my theory is maybe the Cleveland Browns take him. Maybe a dog crap team pays out the wazoo and gets Jimmy Garoppolo. And Bill Belichick shrugs his shoulders and says, okay, I got a compensatory pick, say 2 years later or a year later after I would have gotten this. And it's lower than I could get right now. He's not going to replace Brady now. And so let's try to be realistic. What do I really want to do? And I think part of this was Bill Belichick saying, I want to do something good for somebody I really like. And there's not a lot of head coaches that Bill Belichick respects as much as Kyle Shanahan, and that's the truth. And John Lynch was in his camp, Patriots camp, right before he retired. And so he really, really respects John Lynch.
So this would be a returning of the favor, so to speak.
Yes.
Well, there was that scene in House of Cards where Frank said it cost me very little, but it would mean the world to him.
Yes. And let me just say one other thing. So I actually thought of a few. I could have written about this for 3 days. Okay. But I whatever. So there's 2 other little factors in this. The New England Patriots are in the worst cap situation of anybody in football, I think, except for the Rams. You know, they need like $15 million. Where can they find $15 million, you know, to sort of conduct business as normal? I wonder where they could find $15 million. Perhaps with Joe Thuney, their franchised guard. And I think there's a pretty good chance during this draft that Joe Thuney could get dealt to somebody for a second round pick. Or what if the 49ers say, even though they're not in the best cap shape either, so I don't really think this is going to happen, but they've got to think about it. What if they say, we'll take one of the 3 best guards in football? And I don't know what, you guys would know that better than me. Let's say we take one of the 3 to 5 best guards in football at a stiff cap price, where we take him and all we do is we move down 10 spots. And you know what that would mean for the 49ers? Think about it. I believe out of the first round, they want a wide receiver and they want a defensive tackle. Okay. And if those are the 2 things they want, if they're picking at 23 and 27, you know, they're not going to get Derek Brown, you know, if they pick at 13.
Thank God.
You know, and so they might get Kinlaw. I don't know. But if they trade down to 23, they can get a good receiver there. And at 27, they can get the 3rd or 4th defensive tackle on the board. So, and just envision, in moving from 13 to 23, they either get like New England's one next year, or they get Joe Thuney. I mean, that's not bad for the 49ers.
I think getting, you know, Joe Thuney to me is not, at that price, would not be nearly valuable enough. Like, I think you're just paying him too much. But the whole doing a team a solid thing, like, it takes everything off the table. If I'm the Niners, I would need draft picks, because if they just think about if they just took Tua at 13 and said, we'll wait till someone makes us a nice offer here, you are getting a couple of firsts. I mean, that is how valuable the quarterback position is. So that's why I think the whole Patriots-Niners dynamic makes this way more plausible, because they have that history together. And that's why I found it so fascinating. If the Niners stay at 13, do you think they're going tackle then first? Or
listen, I don't know. I don't know whether they would, because to me, look, I'm gonna make a statement that 5 months from now, if you replay it, you are either gonna totally laugh at me, or you basically are going to say that you vastly, overplayed your hand. Okay, but so I just want to make this point that every year when I go to NFL training camps, what I do is I try to look at teams, and I always ask, like the general manager or the coach, or maybe a coach I would know on the staff, who should I know who I don't know? So I went to the 49ers camp last year, early on in camp. And the day I was there, and you're going to laugh at me, the best player on the field, at least the guy playing the hardest and who looked incredible to me, was a wide receiver from Baylor named Jalen Hurd. And he was the 3rd round pick of the 49ers. Yep. Big guy, I mean, huge guy, like 6'4", I'm guessing 235. I mean, I would have been shocked if they said, yeah, he's a tight end. But when you watched him run routes and run down the field, he was fast and he had great hands. And I walked out of there, and one of their beat guys said, well, what'd you think? And I said, I'm going to make a statement you guys will all laugh at in 4 or 5 months when he's the number 3 receiver on this team. But I said, Jalen Hurd could be the offensive rookie of the year. I said, he is unbelievable. And so, look, he got hurt. He was banged up. He didn't play last year.
Yeah.
Everybody's forgetting Jalen Hurd. So my only point is maybe the 49ers right now have, if they could get Jerry Jeudy at 13, or they could, I doubt they'll get CeeDee Lamb, but if they get Jeudy or even Ruggs, I mean, can you imagine Deebo Samuel and Ruggs going into opposite motion on a play?
Peter, I've had dreams about that.
But I'm just saying, in my opinion, I'm not sure that is as big a need position as everybody is saying. I don't think it's as big a need position for them as if they could get Javon Kinlaw right there.
Well, what's interesting is the whole, what do you need? And it's almost like you kind of always need valuable players at positions that impact the passing game, which is why I thought it was so interesting that, you said, hey, the craziest rumor I've heard, the Chiefs go up and try to get Henry Ruggs. And a lot of people will be like, why? They don't need receiver depth. And it's like, well, the whole reason they've gotten here is because they've been continuously acquiring wide receiver depth. And you're not playing for just this next season. You're trying to prepare yourself for long-term dominance. And that's why I think that to me actually makes sense, because that's how they've built this successful team. Now, I can't imagine Henry Ruggs falls into the 20s, but
the Chiefs only have two wide receivers.
You know what? I could. You want to know why?
Why?
Want to know why?
Yeah.
The incredible depth of receivers in this draft and the love that so many teams have for Justin Jefferson. That's how I could imagine him going ahead of Ruggs. That plus the fact, look, I understand there's a tremendous love affair for a 4.28 receiver, and there should be. But I'm slightly skeptical about Ruggs. And I'm skeptical because I guess I look and see that here's a guy who I think, I wrote it in my column, I forget the exact number, but he averaged 2.5 catches a game in his college career. He had 41 receiving yards a game in his college career. Now, this might sound totally idiotic, but if a guy at a school like Alabama, which every year is going to have the greatest players on it, or some of the greatest players in the country, how can you be the best weapon on your team for 2 to 3 years, or the most feared weapon, as some have said, and average 41 yards a game?
Yeah, I would say the thing with Kansas City specifically is that they are a new school team in the sense that none of their wide receivers have to be everything to everybody, right? And last year, they went up and moved up and got McCole Hardman, who almost was the exact same situation in Georgia, an SEC powerhouse where there's only one football to throw to throw every single down. And I think with Kansas City, they only have 2 wide receivers under contract of note after 2020. I do think it makes a lot of sense for them specifically. I agree with you, though. If you're looking at, let's say you need a number 1 wide receiver that's going to do everything, you need him to be able to run the entire route tree every single down. Ruggs might be a little bit, has a decent amount of risk, but I think for certain teams, San Francisco being one of them, Kansas City being another, I think he can be worth a top 15, top 10 pick for certain teams, given how much he would supplement what's really the most important thing in football, which is, throwing the ball downfield in the passing game.
Right. He also did it from the outside, where we've seen Jefferson and Jeudy, they got to be in the slot where it's like it's free, for most of these great teams. I have a couple of kind of quick hitters for you here. Prediction on the NFL season. Chance that we are playing, or we are watching, I should say, NFL football in September.
Better than 50-50. My gut feeling is that the NFL will play some, if not all, of this season with no fans in the stands. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if they take him, in my opinion anyway, if they not take him, But if the NFL would take this game and basically reinvent it a little bit, and I don't know how, but reinvent it to do it without fans in the stands for part or all of this season.
Well, and your answer to the question about, how the contingency plan that the teams had for the draft made George and I would assume, a little bit more bullish on this season being played. I think the two of us are both on the side of, we think it's far more than 50-50 that they play, but far less than 50-50 that there's fans. And our only concern was that the NFL wasn't, taking stuff seriously. But it sounds like from your, discussions of the draft that they are, they're taking this entire thing seriously. And that would increase, I think, the odds that we at least have pro football in the fall, even if it's a little bit of an altered product.
All right. Two more things. I got two quick things for you. One thing you haven't told anyone, you haven't written about, that you might be a little nervous about saying, but that you kind of believe deep in your heart that happens in the draft.
I think Jalen Hurts is going to get taken by a team that has a very good quarterback and by a general manager, a coach, and an offensive coordinator who all believe that the Taysom Hill model is not a fluke.
Okay. I love it.
And if I were to guess, I guess Atlanta at 48 or Baltimore at 55.
I like both those. Your quarantine guilty pleasure. You've been pounding the pavement for so long. You're at home. You've been indulging in anything?
Most days it is at 5:30 a bottle of Peroni right out of the bottle, and then a glass and a half or two of Kendall Jackson Cabernet for $18 a bottle. So my guilty pleasure is not bankrupting me, other than the fact that, in my neighborhood, a 6-pack of Peroni costs $11. So I'm basically spending most nights, I would say, let's see, that would be about $2.50. Let's say $2, and then maybe $8 on wine. I'm spending $10 on alcohol every day.
I think we're both in similar buckets. Me with tequila and Eric with some bourbon. Okay, Meow. So you've got.
Hey, you cut that out, right, Meow.
Listen, Meow. You've got a big draft chat for dollars event.
Yeah.
Coming up in a few hours, Meow.
Few hours, yeah.
Tell us about it. How can we?
Well, the coolest thing. Thanks for mentioning it. So I'm like everybody else. I look at the news every night, and every time I see a 1.5 mile line of cars lining up to get a box of groceries at a food bank, I just want to cry. Look, there's a lot of reasons to want to cry in this country right now, but my wife particularly, and me to a lesser degree, we've always tried to help with food banks, with hunger-related causes, and we've done it some so far in the last month to the best of our ability. And I wanted to do something. I just wanted to do something, and I didn't want to give to. And again, I've given to Feeding America. I love Feeding America, but I wanted to do more of a local thing. And every year we go to the Scouting Combine, and I really have I don't want to say I've adopted Indianapolis, but it's really one of my favorite places. I love Indianapolis. And so there are so many places of need throughout Indianapolis. And a friend of mine there named Angie Six, her and her husband, Mike Six, have helped me with my little event in Indianapolis at the Combine every year. And they helped me identify this place called the Midwest Food Bank. And the Midwest Food Bank, for those, I'll just tell you a very quick story. They serve 72 counties in the state of Indiana, urban, rural, suburban. 72 counties, and usually they serve 90,000 people once a week with a box of food that is supposed to last for a week. In the last month, they've gone from 90,000 people to 180,000 people.
Holy cow.
They barely have enough volunteers to keep up with the need, and they are running out of money. They used to get all of their food donated by local restaurants and grocery stores. Well, the restaurants aren't open, most of them, and the grocery stores are giving them some food, but they still, 55% of their food now, they have to go pay for it.
Wow.
So I'm hoping through some donations, contributions, that we'll be able to raise about $20,000 for this Midwest food bank. Me, Chris Sims, and Peter Schrager, 4:30 Eastern time today. Go to eventbrite.com. There's only about 11 tickets left to this thing. But come on, ask us a question, harass us, badger us. It'll be a good time.
You can donate without buying a ticket too.
Yeah,
So,
please do. Just go to eventbrite.com and follow the directions. Go to buy a ticket, but then you'll be allowed when you go to that page to simply make a donation and not buy a ticket. Any help, you've got to know it's going to go to people who desperately need it.
Peter, that was as well said as I would have expected you to say it. Thank you for joining us. This was fun. We've got to do this more often.
Mm-hmm.
It's always
Happy
a pleasure,
to do it,
my man.
guys. Thanks,
All
George.
right.
Thanks, Eric. You guys have a great day. Hey, listen, have a great draft.
Thank you. You too.
as well.
Enjoy the Peronis.
All right.
All right. That guy's awesome.
I mean, it's on, as you know, I watch old NFL films as a guilty pleasure of mine, and it's surreal that Peter is on literally all of them, and then he comes onto our podcast, 20 years after, to talk about the same stuff. I mean, we've been, he's been such a leader in football for so long that it's cool to have him come on and talk. What was your favorite nugget that he gave out?
So, it's funny. We're prepping for this, and I don't get nervous very often. I've gotten nervous the past couple of times we've done interviews, but both Fred Gaudelli and Peter King, huge people in the industry. And so I wanted our questions to be good. I wanted them to provoke good answers. And I didn't need to. I just needed to say, hey, Peter, talk. Because he's so good at it.
You push the button, and it's
we just needed to get him started on a topic. He has more things of interest to say in 10 minutes than I think most people could come up with, for a month. The thing that I thought was most interesting, that just kind of pops into my mind. We're talking about the Patriots Niners trade. And we talk about this a lot, right? We spend a ton of time using numbers to inform decision making. There is a huge part of football that is people-person skills and leveraging those. And it is just as hard as understanding math and being able to code and all of those things, understanding probability. Equally as important is to understand how to work with people and to leverage those situations.
Well, you know what this reminded? So I've talked to you about this a lot, and Neil, and in the early stages of things, right? The John Smith sort of like method where everybody fights for themselves is the optimal way, right? Mm-hmm. Because if the group is going to survive, it's because of the wits and the fortitudes of the few, right?
Yeah.
But once things are established, collaboration is a first order term. And, and it's the same, like I know, a prominent sports bettor, Spanky, always talks about like he'll bet the other side of a game that his bookie really needs because, he knows that like that will make sure that he gets the best number, during the bet in the future, right? Like there are tons of things that we do that are suboptimal in, between T and delta T, right?
Yep.
But that long term are the group benefits from it, right? And that's that's like quarantining right now, right, is suboptimal individually but optimal for the group, all that kind of stuff. And it's really interesting to see that in real time and have Peter talk about it, because that's something where you and I don't have the intuition about that, and he comes in and is like, oh yeah, that happens all the time. Here's a classic example, and it's like, oh, You know, and maybe we sort of have to think about that.
So I entered this conversation decently confident that the Dolphins are bluffing about Tua, because I just can't wrap my head around how you watch the two guys play football and don't go, one of these guys can play at an elite level, the other guy can't. I leave this conversation. I think I'm now more on the side of, wow, an owner or a GM is going to make a decision based very heavily on something that has nothing to do with on-field performance and take Herbert over Tua. Are you more or less emboldened?
I think Tua will go where we thought he was going to go, if not higher.
I think so.
Yep. The interesting nugget that I took from this, and if you're thinking about draft props, is his nugget about Justin Jefferson, who's currently at 21. I think it's juiced a little bit to the under, but not prohibitively so.
Yeah.
I kind of buy it, man. I kind of buy it. I think.
Well, this is what was interesting. So, in reading his article, and you should go check it out. I mean, I don't know why we're pimping his article. If you're listening to this, you probably read Peter King's Monday article. But so we mentioned the Ruggs thing, right? So Kansas City says, hey, if Henry Ruggs falls to 20, into the 20s, we're going to go up and get him. But then you have the Eagles at 21. The Eagles are not letting Henry Ruggs get past him. They're also, if Henry Ruggs is gone, I don't think letting Justin Jefferson get past them.
Well, it's interesting, right? So, and you know how we feel about Ruggs, but if you're the Eagles and you're at 21 and you have the choice, which of the two players do you think they choose?
I think they take Ruggs, and here's why. They saw what Deshaun Jackson did for that offense, and I think that's the reason. It's honestly, hey, we've seen what 4.25 speed can do when it can absolutely change what Carson Wentz has the ability to throw, where he has the ability to throw.
Such a great point, because I thought to myself, okay, because it's interesting. The Eagles receivers had two phases of basically ineptitude last year. Mm-hmm. The first phase was losing the deep threat that opened everything up. And the second phase was reliability, which was Jeffrey got hurt. Arcega-Whiteside was not like the underneath player they thought he was. Ertz got hurt, and they struggled even completing the shorter balls, right? Mm-hmm. If that was the last thing you saw, if that's the last thing you saw and you overweight that, then Jefferson might be the pick. But to your point, and you're probably correct, the first order thing that really hurt the Eagles offense a season ago was simply not having a player to be able to take the top off the defense. And as a result, I do think the interesting thing though is Ruggs might bust, and it will be one of those situations where it's like, oh look, you shouldn't take receivers that have only speed, right, and not and not productivity in college type of thing.
Well, I actually wanted to talk to Peter about this. He had a radio interview at 10:08, so we had to be conscious of that, obviously. But he talked about, hey, everyone's saying, look, you don't take receivers in the first round because they bust. And everyone that cites this goes back to 2016 and leaves out a couple of incredible receiving classes of first rounders with Amari Cooper and Mike Evans and Odell Beckham Jr. and DeAndre Hopkins and Julio Jones, and I'm missing like 2 or 3, right? But what I think is really interesting is, aside from the quarterback that is truly transcendent, every single NFL player that is drafted is reliant on their ecosystem. And a receiver that is picked early is often going to a team that says, you know what, we haven't been completing passes and we need a receiver. And a lot of the time it's because their quarterback sucks. And on top of that, when you take a receiver in the first round, you are saying you have to be the man. Whereas teams that already have good receivers, who are, Kansas City, great example, right? Henry Ruggs goes to Kansas City, I would be doing cartwheels, because they are taking you to be in a specific role that they know how to utilize. Whereas a lot of these teams that are taking a guy in the top 10, they're like, hey, figure it out. We need you to win every time. And right, one of those is drastically easier to put up stats in than the other is.
Yeah, no argument here. I think, and that's why it's interesting because, the value thing is so entangled. I think Henry Ruggs is worth a first round pick for Kansas City and probably worth the top 10 pick. And why, and I actually, wish we would ask Peter this, but like, do the Chiefs just like blow people away and say, okay, we're going to give you Chris Jones 32 and maybe another to move up to 10 and just make sure that we get our guy? Or is it a little bit more tepid? Because you did see in 2017 that they had a limit, right? They didn't trade up to 1 to get Mahomes. They waited until 10, so it'll be interesting to see, if there's truth to that. And I think that there probably is. Where do they put the price point?
He alluded to that a little bit. It's a rumor that he said is the craziest one. But I got the sense that maybe it's crazy, but it's not unsubstantiated by any,
Yeah.
He seemed to like it. The interesting thing about, talking to someone like Peter who talks to everyone at, all these teams, is that the draft for need thing, I think, shows up way more than any like rational team should think about it. The defensive tackle situation is like an obvious example of this, where you've got, okay, I can get defensive tackle 3 or 4 at 31, and it's like, okay, why? Like, why are you taking defensive tackle 3 or 4 at 31 if you could get a cornerback? And to me, it emphasizes something that I just think the NFL is honestly has got it backwards to a large degree regarding whether a guy in the defensive line or a guy in the defensive backfield has a greater impact on the game of football. Right?
Yeah. But I it's also the incentive thing too, right? Because the issue is, and I talked to, it's about how you evaluate risk. For some general managers, the goal of this draft is to make it to the next draft.
Right.
And for a lot of these other general managers, the goal of the draft is to set you, like, that's like the Chiefs with Ruggs. It makes a lot of sense because they only have 2 wide receivers under contract after this year. So when you look at it, like, it makes sense that these teams don't view it the same, because the incentive structures are totally different for Ryan Pace versus a Brett Veach, or Chris Ballard versus Rick Spielman, right? I mean, there are guys who are on their last leg, and their goal is to get an immediate impact player, independent of whether that's actually the right move long term. And that's what makes it great. That's what makes it fun and frustrating at the same time.
What what part got me most excited though?
The Javon Kinlaw?
No. Like, actually excited was hearing about Jalen Hurd.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Because
I think there are some. I was looking at doing the text analytics stuff, and there's an article on the website right now about wide receivers. There are some wide receivers that were drafted last year who didn't make a huge impact, who I think people are sleeping on. And one of them is Hurd, and one of them is Miles Boykin of the Baltimore Ravens.
Jalen Hurd, I mean, if there's a coach that is going to put Jalen Hurd in the right position, Kyle Shanahan is one of them. And it's easy to forget about guys who get injured. Like, the idea that someone is going to come in their rookie year and just have the perfect situation to contribute, it's far less likely than we want it to be. And being injured in your first season in a team that's that competitive, you're going to be forgotten. But that doesn't change the simple fact that, man, like, if he's really that big and has that good of hands and is that good of a route runner, he's going to make an impact. So now I'm dreaming about Henry Ruggs and Deebo Samuel and George Kittle and this like beast that I'm, that is a combination of like Rob Gronkowski and Randy Moss out there. That's definitely going to happen. All right. We have got another podcast coming on Thursday morning that will be a little draft preview. We're going to do a podcast on Thursday night as well, right after the draft, that you'll be able to pick up on Friday morning, where we're going to talk about whichever team took Derek Brown and hopefully the Niners taking a receiver early. We've got a live mock draft also coming on Thursday that we'll both be a part of. That's going to be a lot of fun. That'll be at 2:30. We've got a cocktail hour tomorrow at 5. We've got a draft show both nights. You ready for this? I'm just trying to make it to the next draft.
I'm trying to make it. Yeah. I mean, like we've been saying before, this is, the one great sporting event for a while. So I think the goal of everybody should be to enjoy it to its fullest, because it might be a while before we have an event this good. So.
Yep, we'll do some draft props on Thursday morning. That'll be a lot of fun. The Justin Jefferson one is a good one. Cool, man. That's it. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll check you guys in a couple of days. Peace out.